Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we are speaking with Robert Reinhardt and Ryan Ward, and by video with Sam Jones for the exhibition A Ponderable Path, which is on view now through February 25th. Hello, Ryan and Bob.
Hello, Mike.
Hello, Michael.
Thank you for being here tonight. So I'm going to spotlight Tina's video. And so Ryan, you volunteered to speak first and talk a little bit about yourself and your work.
Great. Thanks again, Mike and Tina, for hosting the exhibition. It's been a lot of fun so far, and it's a nice opportunity to chat about what we've been up to in the studio. So, little brief background and context on how this work has emerged. I have a figurative drawing and painting background, it's safe to say. In undergrad here in Scranton, where I'm now working at Marywood University, overseeing a modern contemporary collection called the Maslow Collection. When I studied painting here, I became very immersed in life drawing, the figure compositions, emphasis on form and design, and I ended up carrying that into graduate school at PAFA in Philly. Yet I started asking the tougher questions, which tends to happen in the grad school environment, in terms of, well, great, I have this love and appreciation for the figure and creating some sort of traditional, conventional spaces with the figure and images, but what else is there to this? What will really offer meaning to me, and outside of revering certain artists in art history, and through different eras of art history, what do I really want to focus on? So in the grad environment, I started looking back at imagery that had to do with American kind of myth making and American imagery, like cowboys and rodeos and circuses and carnivals, and I started diving into that material for influences, for sources, and I did not expect to be involved with those references as long as I have, but I have maintained those as influences now for 10 or 12 years. However, the way that I operate, especially in the last few years, is I may start with those reference points, again, because they have a certain meaningful aspect to me. They're informing me, they're informing the process. They're questions that I want to pose. The questions revolve around, well, why are they why am I interested in them in the first place? But then when I hash these things out in the studio, many times, I should say sometimes, they're still present. These clips of, I don't know, cowboy hats, clowns, whatever, carnival games, like, sometimes those elements are still detectable by the audience, but many times they're not. So so bringing it up to date with this exhibition and these 8 or 9 paintings that I have in here, there's really only one in the grouping that, or two, I should say, that I think still maintain a couple of those footholds or guideposts or reference points that I'm talking about. But mainly this grouping, it's safe to say, veers over into more of the abstract and non-objective, whatever term we want to use, and we can talk about more individual pieces as we go on here, and I can comment a little further in that regard. But I just wanted to kind of try to supply a bigger picture of what I'm up to in the last couple of years and how these pieces manifest.
That's great. Thanks, Brian. So we'll carry on. But for the moment, Bob, can you tell us about yourself and your work?
Sure. First, I wanted to thank you and Tina for housing this exhibition. I'm pretty excited about showing with Sam and Ryan because I really enjoyed looking at the surfaces and the process of how they were putting their images together. That's kind of a priority when I go about creating these images. My background in undergraduate school at Tyler was in printmaking, and through that, I learned a series of systems and orders and rules and structure. And a lot of that, many years later, still stays with me, though it goes in cycles. And the work that is created for this show tends to be me following a line of going towards simplicity or complexity. And for this work, I think I ended up more with images that dealt with many layers, complexity, and that becomes a cycle for me where I'll get to a point where I'll need to stop and I flip and I revert back to images that are incredibly simple, and a lot of these sort of cogs and layers and stuff just get edited out. But for this work, I was really looking at making the pieces, taking a sense of chaos and imposing an order on them. The complexity sometimes gets a little overwhelming visually, and I realize that often some people just don't get it. You've got to really cut into all of these layers and surfaces and motions and activities going on. And sometimes I think the visual motion of it is too intense and you just have to skip over it. But I enjoy that process. I really enjoy making components, printing them, because all these pieces are actually printed by hand. They're all monoprints, and they're all cut by hand. And that part of the process really excites me. It's kind of a mystery how these are built. Yeah, so that kind of explains most of what you see here in terms of the 8 or so images.
Great. Thank you, Bob. So we will play Sam. So let me share my screen, hear what he has to say.
Hello, my name is Sam Jones, and I'm a painter and educator based out of Maine. I have 6 new paintings included in the group exhibition, Ponderable Path at Cerulean Arts, alongside Ryan Ward and Robert Reinhardt, and I am thrilled to be part of this show. I'd like to thank Tina and Michael for including me. It's my second time showing with the gallery. I first showed in the fall of 2020 in the 2x2 exhibition. I lived in Philadelphia from 2015 to 2020 and earned my MFA at PAPA in 2017. So that's how I first met Michael. The 6 paintings that I'm showing in the Ponderable Path were all made between 2023 and 2024. So they're all new works, and they were all made over the course of the last several months simultaneously in the studio. I like to work in an improvisational way where I don't start a painting with a specific plan in mind. Rather, I start with a field of color or a series of forms or a certain structure, and then I use the painting as a source of inspiration for what will come next. So it's really a call and response where the painting is informing me of what to do next. In a painting like Logos, I worked on a wooden panel, and I actually used an X-Acto blade to carve away layers of paint to expose the history of the painting back to the previous layers. So I have a very varied surface and a lot of tactility and texture in the painting, and it is reminiscent of topographical maps and influenced by art historical movements like Impressionism and Abstract Expressionism. My painting Dreaming in Color, my largest piece in the show, also was made through a technique of erasures, but in this piece, rather, I used a rag with Gamsol to wipe away a lot of the layers and expose previous histories of the painting in that piece. In paintings like Hypomania and Playbook, I was inspired by artists like Keith Haring and Jonathan Lasker, and was using a drawing technique with thick, tactile line work that was built up slowly with high saturated colors and references text-based languages. In Nightshade, another large painting in the show, it's more of a singular kind of portrait style painting and is more of a minimalist work that's more moody and emotional and psychological. So I really liked that this piece was a little bit more balanced and calming and could offer a sense of breath and space in between some of the more busy works. My painting Past Present is my smallest work in the show and also has some of that playful, inventive line work of Hypomania and Playbook. And I was also using an X-Acto knife in that piece, scraping away certain areas of the painting to show the previous layers. So I had a lot of fun making these 6 paintings and am super grateful to be able to show them at Cerulean Arts in such great company. Thank you for joining this virtual Zoom tour, and I hope to meet you all in the future, and I hope that you enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Sam, for that. So, Bob and Ryan, you know, the premise for the show was we were looking for artists and work that embrace experimentation, play, and the physicality of materials in their work. Can you speak about that?
Sure. So one thing to mention in regards to the physicality, the surface, texture, all of these elements, as you mentioned in the description of the show, and for my work in particular, that they sort of become objects, or there's an emphasis on the objecthood of them. I think it's very true, and it's something that is very important to me. I look a lot at ancient Roman mosaics and frescoes and early Italian frescoes, and I love when they're all deteriorated and there are only clips remaining of these images, and you get all kinds of awkward spaces and weird shapes within that. But I've always had a real affinity with the tactile. You know, I even make some sculptural work in, you know, through the studio practice, and the physical material, physical handling has always been a thread that yeah, it's been very important to the whole scheme of things for me. So even if the material is acrylic and paper on panel, I think I end up beating up the surface so much that, you know, pasting on, peeling off, all these things, it begins to resemble some of these references that I'm talking about, like ancient frescoes. And not that I want to limit, I don't mean to say that I'm aiming for that look specifically, but the that kind of history, that kind of intrinsic history within a piece, and seeing and allowing it to show in the end is something that I've noticed is a common occurrence through my work. I tend to, when I go through a museum or gallery, I look at the edges, I look around the sides of pieces. I kind of need to, for whatever reason, I need to know how it's constructed and the depth of it and all of that. And but yeah, on your point about play and experimentation is also super important to my process. I have many surfaces going simultaneously in the studio, as many artists do, so that I can put it aside for a while, come back, say, oh, that doesn't work at all. Let's change this. So I'm pretty restless with my process too, and I also tend to operate in this collage language many times. So, which means I can get a very different result very quickly using collage elements, right? So I can just see the image, the piece in a very different way, a very different light quickly. And I operate at that kind of pace, or that a lot of times oil doesn't even work for me as a medium because there's this drying time involved. So it's like acrylic is much more conducive, and paper and elements like that, or even nailing into the wood or screwing into it. And so largely that has to do with play, until I get something hopefully that's surprising and unexpected for me and other folks that witness the work. And that's the ultimate goal then for me, is to get it to exist in this middle space of where it seems familiar, this shape, this form, this image, but you can't quite place it, you can't quite name it. And I love that middle area, like as if you're trying to, something's on the tip of your tongue, you're trying to remember a word or utter a word, but it's that micro instant before you do. and that's what excites me. And that's why I look at certain artists and think a lot about certain artists that we can get into that, but
Yes, well, thanks, Ryan. So Bob, what are your thoughts on process and play and experimentation and planning?
So these things are kind of built up. If you look closely, through the transparencies, you're going to see a composition that basically is influenced by the work of Modrian. And that might be a bit surprising because I have covered it with so much stuff. But the basic flat board starts out with a series of rectangles and squares that I balance out very much like his later work. And then from there, build the fields or the layers on top of it. I spend a lot of time making components. And by components, I mean these circles, these web-like kind of paper cuts, the cutout circles. In the recent works, I've been using frosted mylar because some of the colors and forms were a little bit stronger when I got halfway through building some of these, and I needed to mute them. And I wasn't willing to use paint or any gel mediums to do it. And I had the frosted mylar there. And so that really worked well, but on one side, it muted it for me. On another side, it was a nightmare to begin to glue these pieces together because the glue that I was using for all the paper products, basically an Elmer's based kind of matte medium, wouldn't adhere to the frosted mylar. So what I needed to do is figure out a glue, which ended up being epoxy. But then the epoxy had to be applied with these little toothpicks because some of these circles and discs are really thin. So there's a whole structure. It's kind of like making appointments for certain parts of the piece, because if they overlap on paper, that's a quick, easy glue. But if they overlap onto the Mylar, that's a different type of glue and a different drawing process. So again, the whole process of making it is what interests me. In terms of the images, what they look like, what kind of reference, about a year or so ago, I had to open up my desktop, my iMac. I don't know if you've ever done that, but inside that, once you open it up, it's this incredible network of components and circles and things all working together. And it brought back a memory of when I had to have my watch repaired and I went to a jeweler and he popped off the back. And there's this wonderful world of gears and things all moving at the same time. And that's kind of what these things are. You know, some of them have a little bit more complexity than that. I've tried to mix a little bit organic. The cutout web-like pieces are new in the past like 5 or 6 months, because I was looking for a new component to actually bring a little bit more movement, a little bit more organic movement through it. And so that's how these things happen. Some of these take about a month or two to actually create because the pieces are all laid out onto a grid before they're glued. And I can spend weeks just moving around components, changing the color of the circles, changing the position, or actually muting it and changing the layers. And I've not been good about making final decisions. And what used to take me a week or two now takes me about a month or two. These 12 by 12s take the longest because I could keep changing things. If I even move things over an inch or so, it makes a huge difference to me as to where the balance is.
And are you working on multiples at the same time? Or one?
Yes, because I am, Mike, because the fact that some of these things need gluing time,
Yeah.
and some of them just stump me, and I just get frustrated and I push it over and I'll work on another one. And then with a fresh eye, I can come back a few days later and go, no, that dark blue circle's got to go. Let's change it out for an orange one. I have an inventory of all of these shapes. So if one's not working, I just go into the cabinet and I pull others out and I can kind of just, shift and move around.
So for your components, do you know exactly where to find them all, or is it is your library big enough that it still surprises you when you put your hand in there? Or,
It's a cabinet. I think there's about 8 or 9 shelves in it, and they're all separated: full circles, half circles, webs, cut out circles, circles that are cut out that have cog kind of like cuttings into them. And I'll just pull out 5 or 6 of them, and I'll drop them on the table and then just move them around. I could spend a whole afternoon just moving around shapes. And it's, I guess it's my own aesthetic balance that says yes or no.
and you mentioned Mondrian. Are there other artists you think about?
I've always been a huge fan of Rothko, and I know that doesn't make any sense with these, but before this series, I had, the work was getting too tight and I needed to break from it. So I spent about 8 or 9 years doing really fluid landscape watercolors. And they were kind of based off the freedom and that sort of misty, cloudy kind of Rothko feel. And once I got through that, I felt it was time to go back to these. I do that. I'll go through a series of a project until it gets to a point where I need to take a rest. And it depends on what it is, simple or complex, I just flip.
And Ryan, you had the beginning to talk about artists that you thought about.
Right, right. I had mentioned ancient art a
Yes.
minute ago. That's definitely on the radar. But there are two painters, Thomas Noskowski and Charlene von Heil, that I end up thinking quite a bit about. And they, in the capacity for Noskowski to come up with these really bizarre forms and patterns, shapes that again you kind of you see and you go, well, yeah, I know what that is. That's a figure, or that's a machine or whatever. And but you don't. Then it eludes you, and you end up with kind of just the sensations of the color, the shapes, the surface, and it's he's always fascinated me. And Charlene Van Heil is much more this has this collage approach with paint, and I love what she does. Where yeah, there's just an odd. She comes up with very odd combinations and arrangements, and where some of the references are detectable and and figurative, and but then it breaks apart again, and you're then left with kind of the formal elements and the patterns and the movement and the rhythms. And so painters and artists that can kind of, it's a visual aesthetic experience that you're having, and it takes a while to investigate it, and it's revealing more over time as you investigate it. That's what I love. That's what I love. So and those are two examples of people that sort of like, again, teeter on that verge between the recognizable and the abstract. But I have a whole slew of artists that I think about, but those two I can't deny that they end up kind of rising to the surface pretty frequently.
So I'm intrigued by the titles of both of your pieces. So Ryan's, yours are kind of like tongue twister, humorous. Bob, yours are very evocative, you know. Can you speak about that a little bit? I mean, do these come before, after, during?
For me, they come after, and to be honest, I would prefer not to label or give these titles, because for me, I don't want someone to look at this and think that, that concept of finding polar bears and white clouds, oh, it looks like this, it looks like that. That's not what these are about. So don't even remember what half these things are called, to be honest. It just sounded so impersonal to say untitled number one, untitled number
Yes.
two. The title's not important to me in terms of the reaction to the movement and the composition and the color. That's more important to me because everyone's going to see something different.
Right, this one's called All at Once. And some of them
Well,
are like
yeah.
Eye of the Hurricane, Roundabout, Inner Workings, things like that. I mean, they're evocative.
Yeah, well, the thing is that inner workings, roundabout, this is talking more about a description of the components of the movement. I think these images have a certain velocity to them, especially the smaller ones where I was using rice paper and we can see some of the rice paper there. And the rice paper is a bit more organic looking, more like scribbles. And I kind of liked that scribbly kind of image against a hard edge circle. Some of the pieces there look like they're kind of scratched or scraped, but they're not. They're monoprints. There's newspapers in there. I mean, anything that I have or I have access to, I love mixed medium. If I can find a new technique, I'm game for it.
So Ryan, like one of your titles is Scoundrels Barrel Roll Over and Over Side by Side. So
Yeah, that one actually used to be longer. I shortened it for the show, for the labels. Yeah,
it seemed like very, that you
like
thought these out and they're specific and
like
doing something
like like Bob hinted at, I actually a long while ago I used to do untitled, and that wasn't very satisfying. And then I realized that I'd take lots and lots of notes in my sketchbook as I go, including little. I'm a big fan of making these vignette drawings, like where they're very quick windows, iterations of an image or a form. That's kind of how I work in the sketchbook. But alongside that, I make written notes and of phrases and clippings that come to mind. A lot of times I don't know why like colloquialisms and things like that. I don't know why they come to my mind as I'm working, but I'll jot, or like right after I stop a session, I'll jot it down. It'll just be kind of like running through my head, and then I'll go back to it and think about what parts of that phrase or sentence are interesting, and then I'll treat the words and the language like I treat some of the drawings, where then I'll keep changing them around until I get something that I hope that contains multiple meanings. Again, kind of echoing the visual side, right? So I don't love the titles that limit the piece, right? I don't want to pigeonhole it. Okay, this is what it is, because that's not the type of work that I'm involved with. It's I want it to open up into possibilities, so that includes what the title does. And so it has to work on, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 different levels, hopefully. I mean, that's not all. It doesn't always work in that many different ways, but that's what I aim for. And I also don't want it to sound. It does sound more like common language, and if it's funny or a little provocative, then I'll stick with it.
great. So do you guys have questions or thoughts on the show, or like questions for each other?
Yeah, as Bob was talking, I was thinking about how great it is with the Mylar aspect. Like, the different spaces that you achieved. So you have the left and right and up and down, all these great movements with all the patterns, all the different size shapes. And but then I think you've gotten a lot of variation. So in other words, there's a ton of variation with your, obviously with your color and patterns, but the in and out space is really interesting. I think you achieved a lot of different atmospheres with that in and out, with that foggy to then high contrast or high saturation. And so that's impressive. And it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear about your process too. I mean, these things are so intricate. It's making me think, like, I'm really interested. Yeah, I'm interested to hear more about this idea of having something be like a little overwhelming that you mentioned a minute ago. It's like, yeah, is it like what does that look like if you like take that to the extreme, like like even more, and say like, but there's a lot to chew on, which I really admire within each piece.
Well, I can answer some of that, and I'm glad that you can see that, because I consciously have stuffed these with things. The ones that came before it were a little bit more open, but you had mentioned your sketchbook, and of course, I always encourage my students to do sketchbooks. I don't have a physical sketchbook. I have these tables set up where I've got little scenarios just like this. So instead of using a pencil or paint, I've got the components. It's kind of like a kid's toy box, and they're all there and they're all set up. And that's how I sketch these things out until they are fully formed, and then they're going to be glued. These do contain everything in the kitchen sink in terms of pattern and color. And when I started throwing things together like that, it was a concern at first, but then it was more of a challenge. Like this one here, that if you look closely, there's a big circle somewhat in the center. And that circle has this line variation, which a lot of the other circles don't. And I was looking at it thinking, I need for that to taper. And that was like 2 days of actually with a razor blade trying to make 4 or 5 of these that tapered. But that kind of detail is stuff that I really think kind of adds to the diversity of shapes and stuff. There's so much, it's more of a choir than it is a solo performance for these shapes. And again, I get it if some people find them overwhelming or cold. It's not how I perceive them, but you've got to go in there and try and get a hold of the velocity of it and see if you can stay with it. They can visually be a little challenging, but that's the fun part for me. The part of your work that I really enjoy, and the camera was on it before, where you nail things to the boards and you leave these pieces of metal and the paint almost looks like it's kind of smushed on and it bleeds down. And then in the same piece, yes, yeah, in the same piece, you get a beautiful collection, a community of different marks and shapes. Because when I look at this, there's a lot going on. Each time you move 3 or 4 inches, there's another surface, there's a wash, there's a bleed, there's line. It's kind of all of these different components, but they're all in the same song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Bob. Thanks.
Very
Just to comment briefly on this piece was probably the one that I most recently touched before dropping off the work, because it was evading me what, like, how to, there is a lot happening in it. So then well, I've had the surface around for many years in the studio, so it just, I would go in, pull back, go in, pull back, and then, but I wanted to retain those histories within it, all those levels, geologies, if you will, and then, but then I need a I need some cohesion ultimately with it. So then I think I pulled, like in the last second, I kind of like pulled together certain forms that stabilized it in a certain way. And but I liked hearing the feedback on this particular piece from the viewers and what they were seeing, that they said that some of those spaces opened up and they receded, and others pulled forward simultaneously, which is something I'm interested in. And so, yeah, it was nice to hear the commentary.
That's one thing at the opening I was very happy about, because we had a really good showing, and there are a lot of people looking at the work carefully and making good comments. And a lot of the comments that people would talk to me about, or their perceptions, the way they were talking about the work, they got it, and that doesn't always happen. So at the end of the show, I was really pleased that so many people could see and actually took the time to look at them. I think the whole show has that quality. There's a little bit of mystery when you keep going from one to the other, and the shift, the subtle shift that goes, from each of us to the other one. It's kind of like looking through a camera lens and keep changing the focus of it, just, back and forth. I think it's a really nice grouping.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad Mike and Tina, put the three of us together. I think we complement each other well, but at the same time, I agree with another thing you're alluding to, which is like that abstraction is also not the easiest thing for a lot of folks either. And so our show, or as the title implies, has some built-in riddles, I guess, and that's that's the fun part. That's okay. I mean, we could we could talk more about the overall idea of abstraction, but maybe we won't. Maybe we don't have time for that today.
So if Sam were here with us, would there be something you'd like to mention to him about his work or ask him?
Well, I'm not going to ask, I'm just going to mention there's a wonderful quality to his color that I really enjoy. And I might be off base here, but there's kind of a playful way that he puts the shapes and the forms into his paintings. I really responded to this one, and then there's one a few down from there. Yes, that one there. I love the fact that that's next to my piece, because you look at the two of them, and I think I said earlier, I often go down this path of complexity to simplicity, and having that piece next to it, that's kind of my timeline. And I love just, it's so direct and vibrant.
Yeah, I admire Sam's ability to kind of oscillate between different approaches. I mean, they're fairly different from one to the next with Sam's work, where you have these kind of symbols, and then in the one we're looking at there, hard to place, hard to name symbols for sure, but then the other one that's smeared and scraped is completely, it's eradicating maybe what used to be implied symbols, and then that one in the middle that the camera's on now, I mean, that's like a window, this really interesting shape and form with a deeper space. It appears in the center, and really love that one in particular. But Sam also has this, the paint resembles candy in my mind. It's like this really, really appealing use of color and the paint itself, which I think draws you in initially, and then there are these other deeper aspects that keep you involved.
Thank you. So before we end, Bob, so you're going to teach a workshop in conjunction with the exhibition next Sunday. And can you give like a brief description of what people would do?
Well, what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to start off making simple monoprints. I'll have a series of different mats that we'll be able to ink up and print several times so that they'll have the basis of a print that they can cut up and collage. We'll talk about composition. And I've got a number of materials. We can do cutouts, and some people want to get into some painting on top of it. I hope it's kind of a mixed medium kind of festival of putting all these different things together.
Sounds great. Well, and if people want to sign up, they can just head to our website and sign up there. Well, we'll end here. Thank you so much, Ryan, Bob, and Sam, for your thoughts tonight. It was great.
Thank you, Mike and Tina, Bob, and Sam. Really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And the show is up through February 25th, so we hope everyone can come down and check it out. And everything's also available on our website, ceruleanarts.com. So thank you and have a great night.